meeting, and as Oswestry. Who wants to go first? I think you're just going to have to unmute.
I don't mind going first. I'll kick off. So Laura Fisher, Head of Housing Resettlement and Independent Living at Shropshire Council.
I'd jump in next. Melanie Holland, Housing Strategy and Development Manager, Shropshire Council.
Hi, I'm Sue Allen. I'm the Locality Manager for Bromford.
And hello, I'm Richard Woolley. I'm the Chief Executive of Connexus.
And we've got some other guests in the room that I'm going to invite to come and join us at the table when we get to that item. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves when we get to that bit. Okay, I'll move on to apologies for absence and substitutions. I've got apologies for absence from Councillor Ted Clark. Today, so. Item 2 is disclosure of pecuniary interest. Is anybody who's indicated? Yep.
One of the items on social housing, my brother has a housing company in Shropshire.
Okay. Item 3 is the minutes. Oh, sorry. Yes. Can you use your mic?
Yeah. My daughter lives in the Connexus house. She's part of it.
Item 3 is the minutes. To consider the minutes of the Communities Overview Committee meeting held on the 23rd of November 2022. Okay, if you want to raise those. Proposed. Just in the second, Nick. Thank you. Public question time. No public questions or petitions have been received. Is member questions? No member questions being received. So we move swiftly on to the main item, which is understanding the housing market in Shropshire. We've had a report circulated to everybody. We've also asked representatives of some central housing providers in Shropshire to join us. So before we get into the item, just look behind me and say that if you would like to join us, we've got yes. Both sides, yeah. Decide how you can split yourselves, who's going to be on their own. You're welcome to join us or dip in and over if you feel need to do that. Okay. If I can just get you, so the microphone's in front of you, it's the right-hand side button when you want to speak, but if I can just get you to introduce yourselves as we've done with the others, for those that might be watching online.
Hello, I'm Wayne Geffings. I'm the Group Chief Executive for the Weekend Housing Group.
Hi, Sarah Bowden, Chief Executive of the Housing Plus Group.
Good morning, John Green, Chief Executive of Shropshire Rural Housing.
Thank you for joining us. So, if you very quickly picked up on, as important as the mic is to go on, it's to go off as well. Once we get it, it causes chaos with the system. So we've had the report through to everybody, and I think it's one of the things this committee's decided they want to look at is the housing market. It's to serve life to everybody. One of the things I just want to say was a note in the Affordable Housing Commission 2020 said unaffordability is a significant cause of many of the nation's social and economic ills. It's the lack of affordable housing that so often lies behind the problems of poverty, homelessness, debt, family breakdown, mental and physical poor health. Housing stress also has a negative effect on people's life chances, as well as on local communities, the business and voluntary sector, the wider economy and public spending. I think as you've been through the report, I think it's fair to say that some of those are certainly recognised within Shropshire as well, whether it's within the wide market or in the social housing market. So I hope you've all members have had a chance to look at the report. So what I would propose to do is, obviously, you've very kind of been joined by experts and providers in the field. So I'm conscious we want to make the most of their knowledge and input into this. So as we go through, what I would say is we'll not take a normal approach. If anybody wants to raise anything when we get to the point of a recommendation for us to consider at some point, the report asks us for feedback, and then we'll sort of bring that together at the end and agree those. So with that, I'll pass over to Jen to just introduce the item.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So hopefully people have had a chance to look at the report. I will just run through and pull out some salient points, and also to credit Melanie Holland, who has done hard work in pulling this report together, and also doing a lot of research that's contributed to it around the housing needs survey. So as Councillor Macy says, obviously under the Shropshire Plan, the provision of more suitable affordable homes for local people and key workers is absolutely critical. And we do have approaching 20,000 social housing colonies already in Shropshire across the 30 different registered providers. That includes the council. We have as the council around 4,000 homes. But that does deliver about 14% of our housing stock as affordable housing, which is below the England average of 18%. So this is an issue for us in Shropshire. The high levels of housing need that we have for social housing includes a lot of homeless households and also some gaps in supported housing provision, which this report draws out. So there are also a few points at the end of the report about changes in the regulatory regime, which is going to be quite significant in the coming years in terms of the impact on affordable housing providers and the expectations of them, particularly for the council as well. So for clarification, social housing can be either rented or it can also be low cost home ownership. So we're talking about a 20,000 figure, that includes low cost home ownership as well. It includes older people's housing and also various forms of supported housing, such as people with learning disabilities, ill health, and vulnerable young people. There are a number of appendices to the report which set out some more detail in terms of who owns the social housing in Shropshire, which is interesting to note, and also how it's distributed across the county, because we're aware that there are variations in the distribution, particularly rural areas, which can have localised impact on access to affordable homes. Point to raise as well is about specialist accommodation for older people. Most of this at the moment is sheltered housing, traditional sheltered housing. There are also low numbers of supported housing. So at the moment we only have 2 schemes for younger people, including care leavers, 10 for people with learning difficulties or disabilities, 6 for people with mental ill health, and a small refuge for victims of domestic abuse. So that's quite a limited provision, given that some of the reasons for people being homeless in the first place are often associated with specific need. So this is something for us to focus on for the future. In terms of the definition of housing need and demand, there's a section from 4.9 onwards which goes into this in some detail, definition of who are homeless. And a lot of this is clearly set out in housing legislation, including the Housing Act 1996. I won't go through it in detail, but it really creates a hierarchy of need which the council then has to respond to in terms of its statutory role as the local housing authority. So the highest definition of need puts people into what's known as the reasonable preference category. And of the approaching 6,000 applicants on our housing register at the moment, we have 3,500 people or households in that reasonable preference category. The people on that list are then put into bands, and those are set out in figure 3 as to which priority need people have, whether it's top priority, gold, silver, or bronze band. So those in the bronze band are people who don't owe that main duty, that priority duty on. Going through, we have a strategic housing market assessment, which was undertaken in 2020, and that identified a housing need, an affordable housing need, I should say, of around 799 dwellings per annum, the majority of which was anticipated to be met through new build. A local plan, the draft local plan, which is going through inspection at the moment, it seeks to deliver 350 affordable dwellings per annum. And that links to both current and future site allocations for delivery of new homes, and looks at both the viability of the provision of affordable housing under other obligations as well for housing providers. There are also the opportunities for windfall sites and rural exception sites, which would be expected to make up the numbers of delivery of affordable homes over the course of the year. There was last year an authority-wide housing needs survey which was undertaken, and this has given us some very interesting data in respect of the aspirations of people within Shropshire to either move into own occupation or affordable homes. And this suggested a figure of just over 3,000 households in need of affordable homes. But we're conscious that this is likely to be an underestimate, as people may aspire to living in home ownership or rented property, but that may not always be affordable to. Other things to pull out, I think, are in terms of our current reliance upon bed and breakfast accommodation. So in terms of our temporary accommodation requirements, for those to whom we owe the main homelessness duty, there's a limit to the access to good quality temporary accommodation, and that does result in the council being required to find an alternative for them. And at the moment, this has resulted in us needing to use bed and breakfast accommodation, and that is placing a high burden on the general fund, which we're very conscious of. And there are measures put to address that and to reduce that reliance. There's a figure that sets out who is currently owed the main homelessness duty, figure 4, on page 8 of the report, which gives us an indication of the kinds of people who are currently having to accommodate in temporary accommodation. In terms of gaps in social housing provision that we're seeing across the county, there are some significant gaps around supported housing for particular client groups. So we would call out the need for additional housing for people with mental ill health, younger people, including care leavers, and for those with learning disabilities, which is going to have to be addressed in years to come. So we are currently developing an independent living and supported accommodation strategy, which will help us to identify how we will go about meeting those particular gaps in provision in the county at the moment. The homelessness strategy is also under review to how we help to prevent homelessness in the first instance and avoid people having to come into temporary accommodation in the first place. We have recently revised our allocations policy and scheme, and that new version of the allocations policy will be coming into action early in the financial year 23-24, and will allow us to increase our direct use of the affordable housing within the county. So we'll increase our nomination rights to be 100% of new lets and 75% of subsequent new lets into affordable housing in the county. It's worth noting that at 21-22 we delivered an additional 239 social housing dwellings within Shropshire, but because of the loss of homes through the right to buy principle, but also through a certain number of other disposals from affordable housing stock, the net increase was actually only 150 dwellings across the year, and that's not untypical, that sort of balance of properties coming in and out of the social housing sector. That illustrates the sort of pressure, the difficulty in matching our need with the delivery of homes. In 22-24, we are going to deliver almost 200 additional extra care sheltered homes in the county. These are going to be in Shirehall, Shrewsbury and Whitchurch, and also some additional supported accommodation with learning disability and victims of domestic abuse. So you see there is some provision for specific housing needs that is coming through across the county, but those are focused in the north of the county. Moving on to some of the changes in regulations. The Social Housing Regulation Bill is coming through, and that will give tenants greater powers in terms of holding their landlords to account. This is a change from the way that the Social Housing Regulator has overseen housing providers in the past. They're going to be providing tenant satisfaction measures and giving greater focus on those. There's also an uptick in the decent home standard, a revision to the expectations of landlords in terms of the way in which they maintain their homes. This is in part due to changes around Grenfell Tower Fire and Fire Safety Act of 2021 followed that, and Building Safety Act of 2022, but also some more recent changes arising from the known issues around damp and mould and how these are resolved with tenants. Decarbonisation is of course a big issue across the sector, and there is an expectation that all newly rented properties in England and Wales must have an EPC and energy performance certificate of C by 2025. This is an expectation that is creating pressure on all landlords, including social landlords now as well. Last but not least, the inflation and cost of living crisis currently affecting everybody is of course impacting on the social housing sector as well, as a result of which there has been a cap on rents for the social housing sector at 7% in the coming year, in order to preserve the ability of tenants to be able to afford their rent more readily. Of course, that does have an impact on the landlord's ability to raise funds for the investment in their homes and the new build as well. So that's just sort of a quick review of what's happening in the sector at the moment and the impact that has on us in Shropshire. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to start with a question, and then I'll open it up to members and see from there. So my thing is, with different providers, and you mentioned there's over 30 in Shropshire, all of them have got probably slightly different organisational agendas and investment priorities. How is the delivery of social housing to meet demand coordinated, if at all? I suppose that's open to the providers to change, and who wants to take a shot at that one?
Shall I go first? So in terms of coordination to meet demand, the council has an enabling team which work with all of the social landlords who are in delivery of new developments, as well as with private housing developers who have an obligation to provide affordable housing as part of their new build schemes. And their responsibility is to work with colleagues across the council on identifying what the relevant housing need or demand is for that particular locale where development is happening, and to try as closely as possible to get a match to that demand in the delivery of those new affordable homes, and to maximise the number of new affordable homes that get delivered on the site as well. So they would then liaise with affordable housing providers and with any other sort of relevant parties, particularly parish and town councils, for example, in that locality as well, in order to make sure that there is a good match. There are many things to balance at that point to make sure that the right homes get delivered. It will be dependent on the site itself as well, and what's appropriate, but we'll get the consent there too. They do this under the umbrella of the housing strategy as well as the local plan. And as mentioned, there is an intention to update with an independent living and supported housing strategy as well, to draw out some more of that special supported living requirement, which at the moment may not be fully represented in the housing strategy and the local plan, so that we can try and plug some of those gaps that we've identified in this paper.
So from a provider perspective, I think it's kind of from your decisions and so on, and sites you report just wholly into your site rather than just through planning gain and so on. I suppose it's how do you work out that obviously it's important for you to know the market and what's going to work for you as well in there. So I'm just interested to get some feedback from yourselves.
Yeah, if I can, and obviously I'm going to speak probably, I'm sorry Sue, I haven't got your numbers when I first put this together. So between 1, 2, 3, 4 of us, although there's 30 providers, we actually provide 89.6% of your affordable housing provision. So a lot of the other providers are small or rarely sort of take part in the area and don't attend the social housing forum, which is the place where we, as human providers, come together with council officers to try and find a way of increasing affordable housing across the county, and also trying to unpick blockages across the county as well that we come across. And I think that's where we do come together to try and help in a coordinated approach to delivering the needs of Shropshire that's clearly identified by Jane. And I think we can help coordinate and partner there, and then it's actually that when it gets out into the field, when it comes to planning, probably have is at that stage, the way the development process works, we all end up competing against each other for the same bits of land, and therefore become competitors. So we can work the best we can, but because of the way the developments come to market, and I know Jan said you rely on a lot of new development for affordable housing, it becomes a bit competitive there, and it's market led, due to the fact that if there's no sales, those sites won't go ahead and you won't get any affordable housing. I've seen one of 3 sites there, open tiles will be pushed back another 5 years. Because the market's starting to dry up because of the economy. If they can't get the sales, if it's a spec builder or a developer relying on our ownership, they will not deliver the affordable, they'll push it down. Now that's part of the problem. But I think the other thing we need to remember, rather than just providing us for you, we developed our own 2,423 new homes we developed between us for the last 3 years, which is probably most of what James just told us about developing. We're here again. We turn out 254 million pounds. That's our turnover. We employ over 2,900 local people who live and work in Shropshire. And it's probably something in the region of 1.1 billion we have back to the Shropshire economy when you put us together. So it's not just when you think about affordable housing, it's not just that. It's what else does it bring if you can crack this ability to keep providing affordable and across the counter. So trying to give you an idea of what we do as well. When we put together the social housing forum, I keep saying time and time again, I did some quick maths as you was going through, with the 3,500, I think, in your right gold silver value, at the best of 800 a year, you're looking at what? 4.5 years, 6.5 years. At the way it's performing now, it's 10 years, and even if we had our auditing, which is what's also, you're looking at probably 170 between us a year. So, realistically, just to get the 3,500, it's 6.7 years for those new existing people to actually get off that register, if we rely on just what we're doing now. So I was really pleased what you said you wanted to say, and you were on. I've got some magic bullets for you, I probably can't. I know very colleagues would want to jump in because we've all had issues with the planning system, and some of the comments I know we passed at social housing forum is very much around don't let the developers tell you it doesn't work before the light. Because we have given them rates which are probably 70% of the market value these days. They will now developers profit, they need to make a bit of profit, but at 70% of what you will pay if you walked in and bought a property yourself from them, and we're buying 30, 40 at a time. It's part of the issue, is keep getting with them there. I'm going to show you that one's probably one.
I think Wayne's covered most of the points there, and it's really useful to have that background. And I think the point about planning is really quite interesting, because the developers will constantly say they're not making money. What they mean is they're not making enough money. And I think that's where it's very interesting with the housing associations, is we're not for profit. So whilst we do cross-subsidise, we build for outright sale in Housing Plus, and we use that profit to cross-subsidise the provision of further affordable housing, it all gets ploughed back in. And I think one of the issues that we all have in Shropshire, and a number of us work outside of Shropshire as well, is that I think the affordable housing requirement in Shropshire, I know it's zoned into area A, B and C, is between 10 and 20%. And that means you will, in a higher market, get a lot of speculative developers wanting to develop in Shropshire, because that works quite nicely for them. Obviously, Shropshire is the most fabulous county in the whole England, in my view. So they will come here, people want to live here, and it's very profitable for the developers. Staffordshire have a 40% affordable housing requirement, and they hold to it, really hold to it. And I know that because we're on this mixed tenure development there. Obviously, we built there, we've got there, and we're on 640 outright sales. affordable housing. And I think that isn't helping in those numbers. And I think Wayne has very eloquently demonstrated, you know, how long it'll take just to meet the current housing need. And so that refills that pot, just keeps topping up and topping up and topping up. And certainly we're seeing increasing pressures financially as well as a sector, which makes it harder and harder to do, hence the diversity that we're having to bring into our business plans. So that would be one point. And I think the other point that I would make is that the report is eloquent in expressing the need for further supported housing. And obviously supported housing by its very definition requires support. I don't just mean to build it, it needs revenue support, ongoing revenue support. And that is quite a dry source, shall we say, at this point in time. And that adds to the difficulties of developing supported housing across the county. That's common across everywhere, to be honest. That's not a Shropshire specific issue. But it does mean that it's quite an unattractive proposition to be developing because of the revenue risks, the ongoing revenue risks, and how that gets whittled away over time.
What Jane Wayne said is true about the county overall in terms of the housing market, completely true. I come at Shropshire Law from a law perspective. Just so we develop to meet specific needs in the rural community. So unlike our partners on the social housing board, most of the partners on the social housing board, we have a slightly agreement in that it's still affordable housing, so it's housing for people who can't afford on the local market, and clearly those issues are exacerbated in some of the rural areas. So the point about people wanting to move into the county, making house prices, making rural areas more affordable, that's where we step in, and that's where I think the relationship with the council's officers and the enablement team comes to its fore. I personally, with my experience working with that team, looking at what the local needs are. The team acted as a broker in many respects between ourselves and landowners and developers, brokering those sort of deals that have enabled us to provide the housing. And that relationship I think worked well. It's very positive. But as Wayne said and James said, we're not even scratching the surface of the housing need in the county. And the other point we've made is just to reiterate, as James said in their report, the pressures on housing providers around health and safety, around the whole carbon neutral agenda, are increasing at a time when our rents are being held below inflation. So our costs are rising, our rents are being capped. We're finding ways through it. Probably for all of us, we're finding ways through it, but there's increasing pressures. And where that could end up is fewer homes being developed. And that's this conundrum that we find ourselves constantly in as housing providers.
Does anybody online wants to? I'm very conscious of these meetings. I can very easily slow to the people in the room and then not look up at the screen. So it's helpful we're in the dictionary. Richard, do you want to?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah. First of all, apologies if I repeat what's been said because the sound's not brilliant. But I think a couple of the points probably to reiterate. Yeah, we are not for profit, clearly. So all the money does get ploughed back into delivering new homes or improvements. I think a point well made in the paper by Jane is the pressure on the net zero carbon and the SAP-C work, which we're all feeling and we all want to do because clearly we want to improve our properties. And I think just on a positive thing, just to say that is we work together as RPs with the council on the Wave 1 funding for some of that as well. So that was a really positive where we all demonstrated we could work together and got a good result out of that to invest in our homes. I think the other thing I would say is we do, and I think Wayne said this at the start, but just to reiterate, we do a lot more than just housing, if you like, and homes. Connexus has got the contract for the domestic abuse prevention in Shropshire. We work really well with your teams on that, and there's some people I can see here, well, I won't embarrass, that we work really well with. I think the other thing I would say, which I don't think has been mentioned just yet, is because of the nature of Shropshire, particularly the areas we operate. And I think it was John who mentioned it there around the rurality. Is as a providers, we're not, no disrespect to Birmingham, we're not in Birmingham where we can put up an estate of properties of 200, 300 to help with housing need and do it really kind of cost efficient. We're looking at villages and communities where we're putting, you know, I've got the development programme in front of me, and the biggest we're looking at is sort of 38, sort of 40, you know, so it means that those costs are going to be high. But I think the biggest challenge we've all got, and it's so obvious, but I'll say it, is that balance between managing our costs. Costs are going down. We're looking to improve our existing homes, but we also understand that commitment to developing new homes. You know, at Connexus, we aim to deliver. We operate in 2 counties, in Herefordshire and Shropshire. We aim to deliver up to 250 a year, and that's something I'm really pressing to commit to going forward as well. So, you know, that would be 125 in Shropshire each year. We've got a pretty good working relationship with the council. Someone like Jane I speak to on a fairly regular basis. But, you know, if there's ways that members can think to help that dialogue improve, you know, I'll be delighted to see it. I mean, you know, people around the table, I speak to Councillor Parry occasionally. But if there's better ways we can improve, you know, I'm sure all providers will be delighted to hear that.
Well, thanks to all the officers who have prepared the report and all the providers who have come along to help us with this difficult subject. I think you used the phrase scratching the surface. It seemed to me like you're trying to drain the ocean with a teaspoon if you want a parallel of where we actually are. I mean, the 250 target, if by my reckon, it's not even a 2% increase, so it's not a very high target. Unless I've misunderstood the situation, we've never ever come anywhere near meeting that target. We won't be meeting it this year, we didn't meet it last year. We may meet it next year, but May to May, isn't it? And times are getting tougher, they're not getting easier. We're way below the national average, aren't we? Our percentage of social housing is significantly 14%, significantly below. That's thousands, not 250, it's thousands of houses we would need just to meet the national average. And I suggest in this area of Shropshire, an area of low wages, we've probably got a greater need for social housing than many places across the country as a whole. So we've seen the result of that, homelessness increasing, we've got special needs demanding, and we've got also affordability becoming a significant issue as house prices increase. I think this strategy, well, we know it is a very good response to carrying on to doing what we've done, and we know what we've done is failed. It has not delivered the step change we all want to see. We have to be honest about that. So, my point, continuing to do the same thing, believe the results will be different. You have to sometimes say, we need to do something different. So I would like to propose that we do actually make a recommendation to Cabinet, that we do look at the affordability requirements on the planning commission. We move towards what Staffordshire have adopted as 40%. We have a radically different approach to affordability on site. And then we also, as a council, invest in delivering affordability of social housing ourselves. In our budget proposal, we put forward a scheme for 5 to 7 million. The finance people say, yeah, we can borrow that money because we get it back from banks. This is the strange thing, you know, we borrow money to buy shopping centres, all sorts of things. The one thing we do know actually would return money to us is investing in social housing. We can do that alongside our partners, you know, housing associations, or we can do it directly ourselves. I'm not too popular how it's done. But I think the time is where the council needs to make a significant capital investment in actually delivering social housing. As it did back in the 70s, I think 60s, and when all the houses at the council estate, I think, wasn't in the first place. So I'd like to move that as a formal proposal that we actually make those 2 recommendations back to the Cabinet, and that the strategy is revised in the light of those 2 elements, which I think would deliver a step change we all wish to see.
As I say, if you want to make that, I will come back to you when we finish up. We'll come back and then
we might want to second to see if there's a second for the proposal, and then, you know, the rules are pretty clear. Is that you've got a motion, you've got a second. If we haven't got a second, then we need to go on to discuss it.
I think what I was going to move to was obviously there's some things you've raised in there, and so that others might want to respond to for Ross. respond to. It's up to yourself, but
Yeah, I think I made a proposal. I think you need to find out whether the seconder, who isn't the seconder, we go on and talk about other things. If there's a seconder, then we can talk about it, people can have different views, and, I may change my proposal after what's said.
right, is it a seconder?
I'm not coming to be in the secondary yet, but I want to discuss it a bit more, please. I just, I have dealt with quite a few people that are here. Region Housing have built quite a few really good houses that were affordable.
Can I just ask you to put the microphone a bit closer? I'm just conscious that they're struggling a bit.
Sorry, I'm sorry you can't hear me. I usually speak louder than this because I did used to work on stage for years. I honestly think that Region Houses have always taken into consideration over the years. I've been 20 years doing this. And are you Shropshire Housing?
Shropshire Royal.
Yes. Have I spoken to you before? Your face is very familiar. And we have all the developments, but as you said, we do not insist that these affordable houses are built. It comes back to planning, and they somehow wiggle out of it, wiggle out of the affordable element of it. I know it's very expensive at the moment to build housing. I'm being told that all the sites I'm visiting, even though I've got a broken leg, walking down these houses, I'm being told by the people who are building them. It's very hard, because it's costing us more every day, and it goes up all the time. But when you talk to the people who are desperate, older people who are, how should I say, being chucked out by the ordinary landlords, who have been sometimes in those rented accommodations for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and then they're being told by the landlord, you have to leave, or the condition of the property is so bad that we are having to find through Shropshire Council, and Shropshire Council do really well. I've just had 2 people put into Shropshire Council accommodation, going to the library in Ludlow and sorting that out. I must say that the officers to the Ludlow Library are fantastic. But that doesn't help these people. And as you said, with 200 odd people and more, 125 are looking for housing every year. And we've got to stop letting these people come back to us. And these are, I'm not saying it's you that have been doing it for years. I'm talking about the housing developers that have said are coming in and wanting, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other. And then we cut out what I call, which should be social housing. We desperately need social housing. I agree, we desperately need social housing. We need somebody to say, right, we're going to do, in the south of the county, there are none being built at the moment at all, just in the odd developments where there 10 here, maybe 9 there. Then the social housing bits will be the last ones to be built. And I get that all the time. We've really got to put our foot down as a council and say, we have got to do something about this. We can't carry on the way we are. I remember 10 years ago going to meetings and saying, we're going to do something about our social housing. We need to ask people like Connexus and the other people, can they build more housing? It's never happened. And if we carry on like that, especially in the south of the county, we are really, really desperate now. And I have come forward with pieces of land and said, look, this piece of land has come up, we could build 10 houses there. Affordable housing. Our daughter would save that money. She said to be 1% of the Nexus. But she's a good saver. Now a lot of people can't do that. So please, let's stop sitting on our backside as a council and do something about it. So yes, I will support you with the motion. But I need to say how I felt. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Beth. It's been moved, it's been seconded, so I'll ask if anybody else wants to come in. I'm just conscious that whilst it sounds very good asking for a unilateral increase in the affordability rates and more investment in social housing directly, without the committee sitting here with that in front of us of what the council has in mind through the housing revenue account and other things and so
Can I add to that, Simon, and say, please don't go back to planning and alter what the really good planning people we've got have already decided. We then cut it back, and we don't get the same amount that we should have.
yeah, well, this is the point I'm coming to. I'm also conscious that there is a planning inspection going on at the moment on the rates that we've set currently, but I'll open that up. So, Dan.
I think it's quite difficult to put forward a proposal to unilaterally change our social housing provision from 10% to 40%, just because the county is next door to us. When we don't have any other figures in front of us, I think it would be reckless in the extreme to make a recommendation to do that at times it by 4 or 3, whatever it is, without understanding the full implications of what that might do to building companies that want to build. The costs of everything are going up, and just to say that we're going to unilaterally let's make it 40% because Staffordshire do it, I think there might be a different set of circumstances in Staffordshire. I don't understand how Staffordshire operates, and I think it would be a dangerous recommendation to do that. That said, I think there is a case for some housing developments, they don't deliver what they're asked to do, and there are ways that housing companies get out, for want of a better phrase, of building the houses they should do for affordable. I think that is something that should be scrutinised a little bit. But I think making grandiose statements of let's do 40% of statute do it, I think is dangerous.
Anything else you want to on that one? So, I mean, I can put that one to a vote at the moment if you want.
I don't know what you mean, sorry.
Well, you were saying that you want to forward it and second it.
Yeah.
I would propose that if you're forwarding and seconding something, that
And if I could have, okay, find some
decision on that.
that's a proposal. Make a proposal, it's being seconded. Yes,
Maybe just if we say the alternative is that as before, we say we'll get to the end and we'll report recommendations and go through them and so on. We'll treat this as one of them at that point.
Well, I've made a proposal when it's being seconded, so I think that's the matter that's before us at the moment, and we can consider other matters and have other proposals and consider those separately as they go forward. I think we need to do something different. That was very professional, by your words. We've all tried hard, we've all tried the edges to try a bit harder to get people work before, and frankly, we're nowhere near the scale of the task that's needed. And if we don't change something, then we will be leaving a large number of families in our communities to be faced with homelessness because there isn't affordable housing available for them, and that would be a real tragedy. So I think we need to learn from those who have done better than us on this. 10% requirement for affordable housing, we've already got 14%, seems pathetic to me. They're actually requiring less going forward than you've actually got at the moment. That is the recipe for improving the situation. That's the recipe for making the situation worse. Just follow the logic of it, it's mathematics. The 14% of our houses are social now, but the new estate are only requiring 10%, then as a proportion of the houses in Shropshire, we're making the problem worse, not making the problem better. So I think we've got perfect evidence here to ask. And we're going to ask, we're not a decision-making body, we're an overview committee. So all we can say is, it seems to us that we should have a target around 40%. That seems to be what's needed to meet the housing need. That's got to then go through all the processes and the plan. But I get that. The city says, yeah, tomorrow that will be implemented, but it clears a clear line that on the overview committee that is responsible for affordable housing, that is the sort of scale of target we should be setting. Other factors may then impact on what our actual target can be set, but we're just looking at it from a housing point of view, and we're saying if we want to meet the needs of the people in Shropshire, which we've been elected to do, that's the scale of requirement we need. And the other element of it is part of, part of the budget submission, the way to performance management has been reviewed there, so the officers are giving their recommendations on it. It's not as though it's a new idea, raising money from capital to invest in deliver affordable housing. So there's already been scrutinised, as I said, it's not something that hasn't been reviewed before. It is perfectly feasible, and there's no reason why we can't recommend that to do it. And as the finance officer said, the repayments come back. You know, so how do you pay off the debt? Well, you get it off the banks, don't you? And in the long term, you'll actually make a profit from doing that, as other councils are doing. I see Sheffield, for instance, are offering to buy up houses in Sheffield, in order to use them for social housing, because they can't find enough, you know, they want to move quickly on this, they can't find enough sites, so they're actually saying, we'll buy your house from you, and obviously doing this through housing associations and other people as well, happen like that, but actually saying that's how we're going to deliver the sort of scale numbers we need. That's fine. Okay, we'll move to that.
Daniel's indicated he wants to answer.
Obviously I make no comment on the proposal as much as to, but I would just urge you all to perhaps just slow down a little bit here. You might refer to your work programme that's in the papers at the moment and propose to look at this over the course of 3 meetings. Obviously, the purpose of today was to bring everybody together to understand the market, to begin to tease out some of these challenges that you will face, which are obviously sort of fairly complex. The next 2 sessions will then look at the strategy, the policy, the intelligence that informs those decisions, and then finally you have an item where you'll be looking at a regional work programme, understanding how social housing is commissioned, allocated, built and disposed of, barriers to developing affordable housing to rental viable areas, and then to identify recommendations to cabinet. So I think you've got, as a committee, a little bit more work to do to sort of understand what's in front of you before you make those recommendations. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but in my experience, hastily drafted recommendations to cabinet usually are hastily dismissed as well. So I think you need to bring some evidence and a case for making those recommendations to cabinet. In my experience, well argued, well evidenced, well supported, cross partnership recommendations to cabinet sail through. So if you want this to happen, my recommendation is that you do the background work, you take your time, and build your case to take to cabinet.
Thank you, Chair. I agree, I think we're trying to run before we can walk here. I think there are other options that we should be looking at. There are other possibilities to help to solve this problem. I will give one example. In the village that I live in, Oswestry, there's a brand new site, not been built on before, which is now having 18 affordable dwellings built on it. Obviously, I know that example because it's in my village, but I know of 2 of the other smaller examples similar. So it's not just looking at planning applications saying, well, we need a certain percentage of affordable dwellings. There are possible sites, including exception sites, that you could build just affordable dwellings or maybe just social housing. And I think we need the other meetings to look at more information on this before we can come up with proposals that we would put to cabinet. Thank you, Chair. Just want to point while I'm talking, would just like a bit of an answer of some of the housing providers. So whether there's a general policy regarding the condition of properties when they pass on to a new tenant. And the reason I say that is because as a councillor, we don't just get requests, as I'm sure all councillors do, can you help me to try and get a house in such and such a village or hamlet or area. I also get questions from people that have moved into the new premises, and then they come to me as Shropshire Council and say, they told me I can move into it, but I've got to accept that property exactly as it is. I've got to do all my own decoration. And there was a particular case in the last 12 months where somebody moved into a social housing property, but they were told they had to redo all the painting. It just happens that the past tenant was a heavy smoker, and that painting bill was got over £2,000. It wasn't that big a property. And I am just concerned that maybe people who are in financial need, and are being finally offered a property, and it's where they want to live, but they're being told that they must do some work themselves to, should I say, bring it up to an acceptable standard. And I'm not sure whether there's a general policy now, because it always used to be that whenever you moved into a property around I'm a landlord myself with a few properties, I would never dream of putting a tenant into a property unless that property was redecorated, tidied up, and made sure it was acceptable. It is one of the concerns to myself as a councillor that I'm getting people coming to me and saying, we can move in, we've got to accept it as it is. So just, if possible, on that picture.
Okay, right. So I'm going to come back to Duncan. Do you want me to put it to a vote of the members?
Yeah, it's better being said since I've summed up, so if you give me a chance to sum up again, because normally goes to votes on to sum it up, I've got a couple of other contributions to do. Okay. I think in terms of the timing, we've got cabinet who are preparing budget now, we can go to council in March. So if we want to impact on that budget, one of my proposals is to establish a capital fund. We have to make a recommendation now if we want to input that on the budget for next year. Otherwise, effectively, you might have to wait in a whole year. Some of us have been working on affordable housing, not just on this committee, but for many years, if I know it's been years of this. So it's not as though we're coming to this having never thought about the issue before. We're coming to this from all the experience we've had over years of trying to improve the elements of affordable housing. We've got a full report now, prepared by officers to consider, and I think it's perfectly appropriate that we set out that's the direction that we think the council should be moving in.
Can I just have Dean to join us just for a second? Conscious. I've just got a question. I can't remember it. Is this the sort of proposal in terms of changing the capital budget and the other bits and so on that I said on the performance management scrutiny, we've just looked at alternative budget proposals from the opposition, etc. I'm just conscious, is that something that should become, is this exactly the sort of thing that should have come through that process? Or
I would suggest that if we were looking to incur additional expenditure to the council, that's absolutely something that should come through the alternative budget process. What I would say is I'm not entirely clear if what's being suggested is borrowing against the general fund or borrowing against the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account, which is where we own and how we manage our own social housing stock. That's a different question and would need to be done in consultation between Shropshire Council and Star Housing, who manage the Housing Revenue Account on our behalf. I think the wider implications of what has been suggested in terms of overall levels of housing delivery are something that's more the remit of planning than housing. So I would suggest that perhaps either an officer or portfolio holder for planning would need to respond to those questions more directly. But I would caution the Shropshire and South Staffordshire are not the same in terms of housing markets on the open market, don't have the same level of capacity in terms of growth and profit margins for developers in South Staffordshire as do in Shropshire. As we know, Shropshire itself is a large county and has great variations between places such as Shrewsbury and places such as Wenham. So I think any proposal would need extremely careful consideration by planning, and I would also question whether the timing of that would be appropriate given the planning inspectors are currently considering the local plan review, which has a set level of affordable housing in it, and whether now is an appropriate time to amend that. Those would be my thoughts.
Okay. So I think I'm very conscious we've got the revenue, but I think what I'm going to do is you've heard from Daniel.
Let's not forget, because I keep summing up and then you're asking other people to contribute, which is fine, but I like to sum up the debate.
I think I'm at the point.
A couple of points made there.
I think I'm at the point of we've got time. We know what the points are and so on.
The Constitution does give me the right to sum up at the end of the debate.
Can I just?
The Constitution doesn't give you the right to sum up. This is a scrutiny committee. It's not council. It's not any statutory function like that. So these rules don't apply. So the chair has the final word.
So where I'm going with that, I've got it in front of me, but that was the point I wasn't trying to get to. I was trying to give you as much leeway on it. But from my perspective, I think we've heard from the different ones.
Can I just ask a question?
Okay, one more question, and then I think I want to move on because I'm conscious of the expertise.
Where I got 40 people who are in different ways and have been asked to leave the houses from some of the people that are in.
Viv, can I just check, is it a question on what Duncan proposed of the two things that put in a budget?
It's just a general question.
Can we just do this bit and I'll come back to you? Yes. Certainly, we've got far more questions we want to get to, it's just a case of we need to move forward. Okay, right. So can I just check that? So putting it to a vote is optional for at this stage, or
well, I think what you can do here should be wished of is as a committee vote to make a recommendation to cabinet. So what we would be voting for is for Robert to attend cabinet and say, we've had this meeting and we recommend that you take this course of action. And I suspect if you went this meeting and that sort of proposal, I would risk of forecasting here or clairvoyancy. I suspect that what Cabinet will do is to ask you to go back and bring further evidence for them to look at. So,
well, in that case, we'll put it to a vote on that recommendation that to put forward, and then we can second. Okay. Right. So all those in favour of Duncan's recommendation to add an amount? I'm trying to remember now.
There's two elements, so we establish a capital fund between 5 and 10 million, and then to actually move towards 40% area, 35% just check on planning requirement.
And those against? Okay, right. So at this stage, we're not moving that forward. That's not to say there might be a very similar recommendation might come out of the end of the 3 meetings or something at variance of. Right, just moving back on, as I say, I'm very conscious of the expertise and they're giving that to themselves.
Since we've got all these people here,
yeah.
I have got 40 people at the moment who have been asked to leave where they live. It's been condemned. They have been, for one reason or another, been thrown out of some of your homes for not paying most of them and lots of other little bits of things, drugs, alcohol. Is there any chance that any of these people would be taken back by some of you people? Because 40 people with children, some of them, living in a place that is vile. I really, you know, I could ring you one by one, but is it worth me ringing you one by one? Will you let me know one way or the other?
I think it's very much, I corral them before they left the room today, whichever one it is. So what I'm going to do, I think the specific cases, I think we'll try and pick those up a bit separately.
It's just it's 40 people, it's not 1 2.
So I'm just very conscious, just coming back to the report a little bit, I'm just sort of, the report identifies different specific challenges at the moment within social housing and how we get that list down. Taking Wayne's point, I mean, I think, taking Duncan's point, I think it's something like 5,700 houses to get us up to the national average, which, as you're saying, with that, we'll be looking at the problems almost there. But obviously within the challenge of the sort of the capacity overall, there's these specific challenges around homelessness and those in certain needs. So I was just wondering what the different providers and the council are doing, or what could be done for if we have a magic wand in terms of trying to help those people sitting in those bandings. And Nick, I haven't forgotten, I'll come back to your questions in a second. Okay. So, general or others.
I'll kick off quite happy for Laura Melbourne to come in on this as well, but it's worth bearing in mind that not everybody on the council's housing register are people to whom we owe a duty. So there may be people who would like to have affordable housing, but as the council, as the statutory local housing authority, we don't owe duty to all of those people. So there is an opportunity for those people also to get housing in the private rented sector. I would suggest one of the challenges that we've got at Shropshire is, and one of the reasons we have people seeking affordable housing is because of changes over time in the private rented sector. So we've got very few what are known as homes in multiple occupation in Shropshire. believe the figure is now at 63 properties across the whole of Shropshire that fit that bill. Whereas in other places, that's the kind of housing that's very readily available for people who might be at the lower end of the rental ladder, if you like, but would find that quite acceptable because it allows them mobility and flexibility where they live. So I think there are challenges around that as well. I think there's also something around the private rental sector more generally and its affordability within Shropshire. So there can be opportunities for us to explore that further too. And as an example, Cornelian Developments Limited, the council's housing company, is examining the opportunity to move into private rented housing as well as what their current priority is, and of course, homes for sale. But that also has the opportunity to potentially fulfil some of the need that we're looking at on that housing register. So that's something that I think is worthwhile exploring further and considering how we use that and what more we can do in that area. The reference from Duncan earlier about the potential for council to purchase homes as well as developing. Actually, Shropshire Council does purchase homes on the market at the moment, has been doing that, but it's very difficult for us to successfully do it at the moment because what we try and do is cap all of our rents at the local housing allowance. So of course, when you're borrowing in order to build or buy properties, if your rents are capped at the local housing allowance, that means you can't afford absolutely anything on the market. You can only afford up to a certain level of affordability. So I think that is a challenge for us around how we either develop or purchase properties that we're kind of bound within a rent cap. And of course, the recent rent increase limit of 7% not only for the council but for other housing providers as well, limits how much we're able to spend per property in order to bring it into affordable housing function. And that's something I think for people to get heads around, and something that I think is worthwhile is coming back in some of those future meetings that Daniel referenced, so that we can consider, how that constrains our options or what else we might be able to do to address that. There is, of course, borrowing for investment in housing at the moment, and Councillor Carol mentioned the housing revenue account. That's exactly where that borrowing happens right now. And we do build homes within the housing revenue account using that borrowing right now. But again, that's limited by the level that we can go up to, and also by the opportunity, in fact, the opportunity to build new homes, the sites that become available, the sites that will actually get planning consent and will be supported by local communities within Shropshire as well, because it's not always the case that every site gains the approval of local residents for development, and that's also a challenge for us to work on. And that's that's across the piece really. It's to do with parish and councils, to do with the council itself, to do with the developers and registered providers. So a few things in there for us to consider.
So Sarah, you touched on it earlier about the revenue implications, but I'm just conscious from a provider's perspective. How can you guys help, or what are you already doing and so on, or have planned yourselves?
Thank you, Chair. I think, can I throw a couple of things in to start, just to make plan, just need to be looking at different sort of, two of the most successful developments that we've put together with the local authority acting as a funding partner for the primary part has been on land that has been owned by the council, that we've then worked together to say, write the land off, don't look to make huge profits out of it, but deal with the issue you've got around affordable housing. So that's make everything we build on this side affordable, other than a small commercial element that will be a GP surgery. There's a lot of talk about Whitchurch, it's brought in funding from health, it's brought in private capital funding, which you'll get a lease back from the health centre, and it's brought in housing funding to make that scheme work on land that was packaged together, which actually covers the main objective was we're not after profit everything, we're actually trying to solve an affordable housing problem for people over 55, because that was the issue in Whitchurch. They've got aging population, they've got nowhere of the type of accommodation that they felt they wanted to put people into, so we're building extra care, and so it's just planning next level as well. What land have we got? What we got is the little bits we've got. You've got, what are you doing with your land? Is every time you go to market for your land, it's price first? If so, I suppose the question you've got to ask is how are you going to support the housing when you reject? Because if you go across first, you will always end up happening what happened to me in Oswestry, where you sold the main centre, the swim house, to a private developer who then mothballed it. We then ended up buying it. We still made it work. We bought it for actually more money than we had the offer to yourselves originally, which meant we could put fewer affordable housing on that property. Yeah, so I think there's other ways we can look at the land that is in the ownership of the local quality and targeting that to deliver some of the affordable housing targets which you want to increase, which is quite likely we should. We're all here for the same thing. We charities are beneficiaries of the people living in our houses. We try to have people out of poverty and give them a home. So we've all got the same sort of things in relation to what we do. That's a good angle, I think. In relation. And the other point I will pick up is when you talk about specialist housing, it's the issue is with specialist housing comes the need for support and care. And for any of us to look at a scheme that is specialised, we want to guarantee around the support or care that needs from that particular resident group is going to be guaranteed for us. Because the building sometimes is not a big cost, it's actually keeping somebody in that property who's got a care need, whatever that be, who does need a package of care. So I know we've been working with Jane and Laura around before Christmas around the homeless issue and how we can sort of get back into housing. And I think a good 80% need the care package. It wasn't just a house they needed, it was something to deal with a vulnerability or an issue that attacking themselves as well. So it's balancing the two. So if you want more specialist housing, what's going to come with it is a restriction around care. And I know that's another type of budget for you around balancing that, so I'm not certain these things. You know, I end up with massive demand for the most recent of the duties. Shirehall, Springwood, again, extra care scheme, over 55 to a care need. We was oversubscribed, the demand was massive. And we had to tell people like you couldn't secure a care package that could actually keep them in that property and sustain that property. So that's the other point that we've done. So, land, give us land. If we can only charge 60 to 80% of the market rent. That means we can't pay full whack for the land. We pay the same for building, and it's the land that makes the difference to us. So if we can get cheap land, we can give you a full rent. And I suppose that's a request from us all. Unless you don't want to have cheap land, which you wouldn't see.
Yeah, but you can definitely get it. At the moment. I think for the biggest inland county, we keep coming back to the issue of land, which it seems a strange one to do. Dean, I think you wanted to.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll take off my housing hat for a minute and put on my assets hat. To come back to what Wayne said, yeah, I think we have to hold our hands up and say the past in terms of land disposals wasn't always the whole world view taken into account. But the days of fire sales of Shropshire Council assets are over. And we are now looking at all of the opportunities presented by sites holistically. And we recognise that rather than necessarily the upfront capital value, there may be other intrinsic values to the council in providing supported living, the units that help to reduce the pressure out of social care, or additional social housing that will help to reduce the pressure on our temporary accommodation budget and on our housing register. So I would like to assure the committee and our lovely colleagues that we are no longer repeating mistakes that have been made in the past. We now take a far more joined up view of our asset base when we look to dispose of sites. Also, we're now a leading partner in the one public estate in Shropshire. So there is an added emphasis and onus upon us to lead that by example with our own sites as well. So I hope that can give you some reassurance that we wouldn't be unnecessarily standing in the way of land being made available for social housing.
I think that probably feeds into a longer term point of where the council, if we are using the council pot to make acquisitions in the future, it's what acquisitions can be made and what terms, taking a longer view of a piece of land that's not currently viable as something for affordable housing, but in the long term maybe.
Absolutely, and we have very deliberately in a disposal program that we are currently carrying out, we have very deliberately taken out of that disposal program sites that could become either open market developable or social housing developable sites in 10 to 15 years time. So we're not just thinking of today and tomorrow, we're thinking more the medium and getting into longer term view of those, and we are conscious of taking decisions to take sites out of disposal could have that purpose in the future.
If I could just add, don't forget in that programme, I'm sure you haven't, that there is a marriage value piece in that we all own little bits here and little bits there, and sometimes it's just the marrying up of your assets and our assets. And you can do something more. It doesn't tend to lead to enormous scale development, but you know, we're running through our garage sites at this point in time, just as one example, because the garage is too small to put cars in. But if we can get 3 or 4 houses on, but we need a strip of land from you to facilitate getting the highways access into the right standards, then those are very helpful discussions. Small scale, but really, really necessary. It's not always the big obvious pieces of land that can, they're essential, but they're not, those stand on their own.
Absolutely, and I can commit that we will cooperate as far as we can in those, and I know that we already have had discussions, I don't know whether necessarily directly with Housing Plus, but we have had discussions with some of your colleagues, and I've been part of one of those with the colleagues sitting to your right on where we can join up land we own with land in the possession of our fees. So I can commit absolutely to you, yes, we will look at those opportunities as they arise.
We didn't need to get a recommendation. I'm just going to come back to Nick first, because Nick had a question and then I'll come to you, Karen. Your question from before, sorry, I'll get you to just...
Yes. There's a question about the standard of properties on reletting board. And every landlord I expect will have a slightly different standard, board standard, quality standard. We call it in the Housing Plus group. There are some minimum statutory standards that obviously we need to adhere to in all our properties, HHSRS and decent home standard, but then so we will layer up on top of that what our own board standard is. It's not unusual to ask incoming tenants of families, young people, to redecorate, and we would provide them with vouchers so that they have materials provided for them, but if they have the ability to redecorate, then we would often look for them to do that if the property is in reasonable order, but just someone's big and painted one with black and one with purple, which isn't that unusual, sadly. So there are a variety of approaches, and certainly at Housing Plus we've been reviewing the board quality standard and the adherence to getting them up to those standards. Internal decks, etc., are the tenant's responsibility, but I appreciate your point about starting it off in the right way. Similar to you with our market rate portfolio, because you're charging top dollar, then they are redecorated. We will sometimes redecorate for our older customers moving in, who obviously we don't want standing on ladders, etc. So there is a set quality standard. Each of the landlords I would expect to have a slightly different void standard. The priority in all of our void standards, though, would be around the property compliance issues, so gas, electrics, etc. And getting that all A1. So there will be a difference. I'm sure you'll see a difference as councillors between each of the landlords in terms of what we do, and it will also be slightly different between the different tenant groups that were allocating or letting that property to.
Thank you. I've got a question, probably for Jane. What role is there for Canopy in this future? Because Canopy's name is not, you don't see the name mentioned a lot in this report, and I know it's obviously relatively new, but how much part of this picture will Canopy become in the future? Because it's very much a council-owned company in effect, isn't it? It's probably more uniquely placed to help influence that than maybe other outside companies. And then another question possibly for the company's representative. Are there parcels of land that you currently have planning permission to develop that haven't been developed yet? And if so, how long is that? And is that something that we monitor as a council as well?
Okay, I'll come back on that. So Canopy Developments Limited is not a registered provider, so it's not a provider of affordable housing. It's a council-owned company, but it was established in order to fill that gap in the market that other private developers weren't. So typically private developers in Shropshire would be building executive homes, 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses with double garages, because that's the sort of thing that garners you the biggest return. So Canopy's focus is about delivering sort of entry-level market homes. So terraces of sort of 2 and 3 bed houses, that kind of thing, that are much more affordable for getting onto the housing ladder. And they've been successful so far in doing that. So it's a different job that they're doing in the market, if you like. They do, when they develop, as all developers are expected to, provide a proportion of affordable homes on their sites. And because we're a council-owned company, we certainly expect that they're going to argue away affordability in the way that some other developers might attempt to. So they have been working so far with the council's housing revenue account. So the council has benefited by buying those properties for affordable housing from Canopy. So they delivered a proportion into the council's HRA in that way. Quite possible that on future sites they'll also be selling to registered providers like those represented in the room too. So that's the role of them.
So forgive me, I don't know perhaps don't know the full sort of reference of Canopy. So is it something that the council might need to amend, I suppose, then if you do see a role in that, or is it just purely that Canopy will be in the sector that you were talking about, and then that's it at the night?
Yeah, so bear in mind that the council also develops itself through the housing revenue account through staff housing. So staff housing is also developing affordable homes, and they do just develop affordable homes in parallel to the way that registered providers do. They built both affordable rent and shared ownership housing in the past and continue to do so. They have sites in the pipeline at the moment. So Canopy is not, there's no intention that it should move into that registered provider sector. But as I referenced earlier in the meeting, there is an intention for them to start to move into private rented sector delivery. So that has an opportunity to address some of the gaps in the market that might also help to meet need, including some of the need from the housing registry at the moment.
And then there's a question on land that hasn't been developed. Is that, I just don't know, is that an issue? Is that something we'll look to others?
Richard, do just indicate if you do want to come in. I do keep glancing up now and again, but I've missed hands that go up there. Land. Okay.
I think you mentioned around land, didn't you? Yeah. Sorry, that's the point I think you're asking me. I think, sorry, without kind of avoiding the question, I think the biggest thing I'm picking up is about us all working together, really. To me, everybody in the room, we're all committed to providing that additional social housing. If I could say it doesn't feel like we need to set up separate companies or we need to do different things. We've got the skills in the room to do it. It's about working together. So, taking Wayne's earlier point about land, that's clearly a big issue for us, and sometimes it tips those developments over the edge. For me, it just feels like we need to work together better somehow.
Okay. So, no, I guess my question was: is there land that is sort of for development that hasn't been developed yet, that could help housing stuff, I guess, is that something you probably should
sorry, yeah. Just that question for me in terms of, Sorry.
Richard, have you got land you're not developing on, I think? Come on.
In terms of land, well, I mean, just as an example, I mean, serious answer away then is, yeah, there are things like we are rationalising our offices from 3 across the business to 1, and 1 is in South Shropshire, so, you know, we're committed to Shropshire. But one of them's in our WEM office, which we're looking to redevelop in social housing. So I think it's that one. It's a great example where there's land there. We want to redevelop it. Let's work with the planners. Let's get something going so that we can get some affordable housing there. You know, so it's examples like that, really.
Again, I'll jump in. I suppose I've got 2 store sites that have got planning and it's all affordable. And that's a consequence, I would say, of doing the right thing. We work with local Shropshire developers. We don't bring people from out of the county to try and do as much as we can. And we've been working with Hawke, unfortunately, probably all know Hawke went into liquidation, which meant we've got 2 store sites that we're now looking for development partners to finish those off for us. I think one is out of the ground, the other one's not even started. We've got a contract for. That's a consequence on into liquid because, like I said right at the start, it's not just building homes in Shropshire, it's how can you spend our money in Shropshire as well. We do more than just build houses in the county.
Okay, will there be a 3-year plan? We've got something about it.
I don't know. I'll come back to I think Sarah just wants to make a point.
Forgive me, Wayne, but yeah, it's normally 3 years, but if the contractors that may start on site, that means your planning is there forever. So where you have a contractor going into liquidation by Hawke, we lost them, but they were on Staffordshire sites for us as well, we have 3. Then you may start on site, therefore you fulfill the planning obligation, so it remains there in perpetuity as long as you don't want to change anything. In terms of sites that we're not building out, yes, we have 2, both in Shropshire, both with planning, both mixed tenure, but with a high proportion of affordable housing on there. And those are as a result of us having to make a very difficult corporate decision to hold those back in our development programme because of the other financial pressures that we have across our budgets and business at this point in time. So looking at things like damp and mould, carbon monoxide alarms, the fire improvements and changing the fire legislation, making sure that compliance comes first, the increased customer demand that we're seeing coming through at this point in time, and the increased regulatory pressures that we have on business. Plus, it's already been articulated this morning, but the differential inflation is a real big hitter. So the 5% income increase goes nowhere close to the 15 or 20% increases that we're seeing in material costs, both for new build and for our ongoing maintenance and improvement works. So those are sites that we will retain, and that meant we're looking back an 18-month delay to bring those forward.
If I can jump in there, because we're looking for solutions, aren't we? So, and I'm just preparing to pick things up. There's a discussion about sort of the Shropshire Council, their borrowing capacity, and getting rid of the public lands board. There's Sarah's examples there, I'm not committed to this, but she'll find a cheap fund that actually go ahead. Rather than use the funding that we've got, because we're based on the funding we've got, the bonds we have in place for points. If we could get a fund that is willing to come and say, we will actually cover that money at a lower percentage for you, then it grows a money. So I don't know if there is, but if there's capacity for the Shropshire Council to actually kickstart some of these sites for us by offering sort of cheap money up front for us instead of going to the market, that will also help us bring some of this stuff.
Yes, I'd like to go back. So, you know, I'm anxious not to get involved in specifics, but the point that was made was that it had a high, the example used was it had a high social housing element to it. And surely that is part of the problem, because that effectively means lower revenue, and then it makes it more difficult to build out. So isn't that the problem sort of encompassed in one particular example, I suppose?
Not quite, because the reason we've got open market sale on both of those sites is in order to cross-subsidise the provision of the social housing. So the sites will stand alone because of the proportions that we're building that. So we want to maximise social housing. Of course we do. It's what we're here. It's our core business. But I think, as I said at the very beginning of the meeting, we need a proportion of outright sale because grant is a rare thing and not necessarily running at a very high level. So we make subsidy through the sales to cross-subsidise the provision of social housing. And I think somebody said earlier, if we want to provide subsidised housing, which is of course what social housing is, there has to be subsidy and it has to come from somewhere in order to make that possible. So it's an interesting and complex balance. And just picking up on Wayne's point, every time the interest rates go up, and I know we're not alone in this, but every time the interest rates tweak, I think about every quarter costs us more than £1 million. Yeah. So there are a range of things that we can't in this room, unfortunately.
I think that was one of my later questions, was what additional sort of capacity or investment can all stakeholders, whether it's the council yourselves and so on, bring to bear if we want to see a step change in it. But taking into account, obviously, as mentioned, the EPC, C ratings and so on, there's added pressure coming from feels like people are getting squeezed somewhere in the middle between if the cost of borrow is going up and you're getting regulatory, and that's the same for the council as well. It's at the moment, how do we do that, or what something more radical that could unlock and get us out of that cycle, if that makes sense.
The net zero carbon agenda has an impact everywhere. The retrofit is enormous and very expensive, and we are averaging our retrofit like Connexus. As Richard said, we've got round one social housing decarb funding. It's averaging probably 15,000 a property on round one. Very high level of customer refusals, 80 customer refusals to have any of these the decarb upgrade works, which is interesting. The second phase, we're probably looking with some of our property types, obviously prioritising the worst performing from an EPC point of view. We're looking at closer to £19,000 or £20,000 per property. Now, the rental streams don't get anywhere close to covering that sort of level of investment. It's a very slow burn, very, very long repage while we run such long business plans.
Just on that, so when you say retrofit, how far retro are you talking about? How far do you go back that you have to retrofit? And, is that a sort of statutory obligation for you to do?
EPC by 2025 is an obligation on everybody. So yes, we have to achieve EPCC by 25, and it does depend on the property type. So I think all of us will have some form of non-standard construction. Those are worse, to try and get them up to EPCC, and I think there will be some difficult choices that have to be made amongst all social landlords. If you think of some of the British Steel in Shrewsbury, they're ones that look like crinkly sheds. The area houses, which are the concrete panel properties, they are intended to build more rural areas. They can be very expensive to retrofit. So just trying to get them to EPCC would require very significant, often very significant additional insulation levels. Rural properties, we have a problem because a lot of our rural properties are oil heated or electric heated. So you're into or retrofit would be an air source, heat pump installation, and it goes on and on and on. Sometimes we're having to re-insulate internally as well as within the wall space. On some of the non-standards, we're having to put an external skinning onto the properties to bring the insulation levels up. So there are many factors that are included in that. And I'm sure for all of us, our new build specification takes a lot of this into account. Most of our new build planning allowing will have solar panels on for heating and hot water and to complement electricity use. We do a reasonable amount where we're using recycling water from the homes coming out, or water being held, just thinking about the other environmental issues. I know it's not an EPC issue, but it's an issue about overflowing a limited surface water design, and we put electric car charging, and we put air source heat pumps in. So there's a range of things that we're required to do that perhaps as in our own households we wouldn't necessarily be making that investment.
I think because obviously, I mean, taking Richard's points about collaborating and so on, I assume you've all got the same issue. You're all probably talking to each other about, because it's not a competition thing, it's a common thing of how can you drive down the cost of the retrofitting to meet the standard, etc., etc. But my question is there anything more that can be done outside of this? Through, I mean, you talked about the bid to government, the joint bid to government and so on. Is there more opportunity through that, or can the chances of that be improved, or?
I think the piece, sorry, I don't know. But the piece about the bid to government is that we have to match funds. So that's possibly where it is. But probably the greater benefit would be around combined procurement. The partners that are successful through that bid round is actually to procure that in as a consortium, shall we say, rather than each one of us going to a different company to procure some of these retrofit works. I think also there's an element of campaigning and communication that might be quite helpful. 80 is a very high proportion of customers who are refusing these works. And it's quite interesting, there's a huge amount of admin that has to go into swapping customers in and out of a programme like this. And I don't know whether Richard has had the same high level of refusals that we have had come through, but it does slow the delivery of that programme down quite considerably. It's quite fascinating really, because we get letters weekly, and I'm sure everybody does, saying, I want some more insulation in my roof. They tend to be the ones that are already meeting the insulation standards quite interestingly. So it's there are many factors.
Chair, sorry, quickly, can I just ask on that? 80 refusals, but if it's compulsory by 2025, haven't they got to have it done there?
I was going to ask how that came in.
Well, yeah, where you're coming as well. It's their home, and some of these treatments are very invasive. They're whole house treatments, and some people just don't have the appetite to have it done. We have a low refusal rate for the external screening because we do some of the internal programmes, and people are very wedded to what they know. If I said to my mum, who's 82, Mum, you're not having gas and heating anymore, we're going to put an air source heat pump in, she'd be like, I don't want that. You know, she might need a laptop. So some of our older customers are very wedded to what they know in terms of their heating provisions. So it's not going to be an issue that goes away. Can we force them? Well, not really at the moment, I don't think.
Yeah,
but eventually it will come.
Yeah. To complement what Sarah says, we cannot rent a property about the sea going forward after 2030. However, a bit like at the moment, we cannot rent a property that doesn't meet the decent home standard. If somebody's living on it refuses to work, then we can keep it as a non-decent home. But it's got to be with them consent that they refuse in kitchen, bathroom. And some people for different reasons. I know when a property comes empty now, the first thing we do is have to get it up both decent homes and we balance before we can go to it. So that's how it works. It's the person in there got a right to live there peaceful and quiet and enjoy it. And we can't be the first 6 doors and then you push
So are we sort of sleepwalking into a sort of a decrease in housing stock situation from 2025? You can't let the houses out from 2025. Is that going to drop stock and make the problem even worse?
No, because we can't rent them until we've got them to the standard. So when they become, if somebody's living here and has been there for a number of years, they can be in a non-balancing, non-decent home at their own choice. But as soon as it becomes empty and we rent it to somebody new, we will be off the waiting list. We have to first of all get to balancing and we can do this next standard.
So I'll just add to that there will be some properties where it's likely to be uneconomic to carry out the scale of work that is required. And I think when you can see the prices that we're having to pay at this point in time, there will be some. It's not going to be high numbers, but there will be some.
So it's almost as if you're increasing regulation. We're talking about a housing stock problem now, and then you've got further issues coming down the line from 2025, which you've identified. And houses that you won't be able to let until they come out, until they're turned up to a certain standard again. It's almost as if you're being squeezed from both sides there, really. And there has to be a trade-off between increasing environmental regulation, for example, and using that because that's being used here. It's not specifically stay on that. So, you know, you have to. It just feels like almost you're going to have to budget for increasing standards going all the way through, because everyone has to maintain their house. I get that, but you know, if you're being forced to be, you know, proper, you know, in terms of heights of standards, in properties that aren't worth as much as they are, you know, non-sort of social housing, then, you know, it's, you can just see the problem getting worse and worse and worse in terms of stock, not better.
Or maybe the government are going to have to put some money in to make sure all these properties and help you do that. Some government, I'm not saying this government, some government will do it.
I suppose, yeah, I'm very much picking up a theme of that we might want to come to later on and pick up some more information around it or look at. I think Christian just about beat Duncan and then it goes over to Duncan.
So I was just going to ask if why was it uneconomically viable to improve the condition of a house? You look to sell it and perhaps buy an alternative property to replace it.
I mean, yeah, not and again, sorry. Yeah, I mean, you'll find that every one of us, and I speak for every one of us, if we sell a social housing property, we will at least know more about it. You know, what we sometimes can do is, if that property has got a value that's above the average of what can get put, you know, I've been successfully doing what I call asset renewal, not in Shropshire, actually across Telford and Staffordshire, but I managed to put 2, not 3 back for everyone else. So it does give us a way, actually, of increasing the capacity. If we can do it, and if we're not getting that property for a lot of money levels. And that works for us. I know John, you bought a lot on grants, it may not work as well for you, that scenario.
I suppose that was my point. I was going to come to John, and I suppose the important part of this is it comes down to locations as well, because we currently surveyed that, and it shows where there's demand and so on. Obviously, it's more challenging in some areas. So 1-for-1 is fine, but if the 1-for-1 has to move, it's kind of, yeah, how does that work?
Just the very size and scale of the operation of Shropshire, a very small housing association. And we're quite a niche market in rural areas. That presents, different issues, but at the same time, very similar issues. We have to do everything on a smaller scale, still quite at the moment. Going back to the earlier question, we're not holding a plan because we will tend to look at a particular development opportunity to meet a particular need, source around all the property and develop it there and then. That's not to say that going forward we won't be able to operate that way, by and large due to the way the economy is and construction costs are rising at the moment. So we're looking at a couple of opportunities at the moment, a couple of schemes. And we will have a conversation about whether it is right to buy land, get planning, and then maybe leave it for 12 months to see how the construction costs go. And they're conversations that every housing association has at the moment, just in order to maintain the viability of the scheme. It's not something we want to do by any stretch of the imagination, and from a Shropshire perspective, I don't think we will. But it's certainly an issue. On the other matters, such as the retrofit, and what we're doing in terms of EPC level C, we've got a plan in place. We know we can achieve it back by bringing in some grants. We are quite fortunate in that most of our stock is less than 14 years old. So it's been developed relatively in recent years to better standards than stuff that was developed in the 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s prior to that. So we are reasonably fortunate in that respect as well. But still, it's a pressure because every time there's more legislation, more regulation coming out, places more pressure on the finances of every housing association. So we do find ourselves in this. I keep getting told by my board members, we're in a perfect storm, and it is that scenario where our income through our rental income isn't keeping up with inflation, and at the same time there's increasing pressure around health and safety, around carbon neutral, and around continuing to develop. So there's this increasing pressure that we need to work with.
Just going to bring Jane in, then we'll go to Duncan's.
Thanks very much. So, interesting points around the need for investment in the social housing sector. And you're absolutely right, and the pressure from all directions on the social housing sector is very much being felt. Those increasing expectations and the increasing inflation and the little income, all of these things are sort of creating a perfect storm in the sector. But of course, that impacts on councils' own housing as well as the registered providers' housing. So this is something where a lot of providers are now speaking to Homes England, which is Foregate funds, which is funding out to the social housing sector to see if we could get some increase in investment coming in. So this is going to run and run, I think. It is a big pressure, and it's exactly as you say. I think the idea that Shropshire Council can find funds to provide to the social housing sector in Shropshire, I think it's quite a long time since councils have done that sort of investment in reality, and times being what they are, we're in an exceptionally difficult financial situation for all the reasons to very publicly known across all of the local government sector, really. So it's a difficult task, but completely what I understand the way that's completely understood. I think in terms of sort of kind of going back to the issue, it's not only about delivering new homes. I think we also need to think about how we make the best use of the homes that we've got in Shropshire. So one of the points that I wanted to flag too is the reference in the report to the allocations policy change. So one of the things that we've been trying to do over the course of the last year or so is to improve our contact, our relationships with all of the housing providers in Shropshire. So we reference the fact there are 20,000 affordable homes in Shropshire, 16,000 upwards of our general needs homes for rent. So I think what's really important here as well is that those homes that we do have also been let to the right people. So we reference the fact that lots of people on our home point housing register, but not all of those people are those in priority needs. Some of the people aren't just have put their names down on register, but actually they have other options available to them quite conceivably. So I think one of the things that we want to focus on as well in the coming year is improving those relationships with some of the RPs. We're talking to the largest of the RPs in the room today. There are many other smaller housing providers as well that we want to make those communications with, so that we are able to nominate people into those properties when they become available, but also to make sure that any of the affordable homes that come up for rent are going to those people on the highest need bracket within our housing register, because otherwise there's a risk that there are people who stay on that list for longer than they need to. So that's just another element of the challenge that we've got.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a perfect storm to pick up a comment over that, but it's not something we weren't well aware of. We know about this for decades, haven't we? We've got the leakiest housing in Europe. We've actually had legislation. I remember back at the time, by 2015, the building regulations would have required every new property to be zero carbon, every new property. That was cut out. That was capital green crap from Cameron's government. They abolished all that. So we're not here by accident. We're here because we made deliberate choices not to do this stuff when it was easier and when we could have planned to do it. Therefore, we've sailed into the storm, and we're now faced with an impossibly difficult situation. The government's not helping by capping the rates of housing associations. So why would they want to do that? Well, they're just not saying the housing benefit bill. They know, and you know, that 70% of your tenants are on benefits, and that the government will have to pick up the bill for that. And the government's just saying, oh, we don't want to pick up the bill for that. Therefore, we won't allow the housing association to have the resources they need to do the work. It's not expensive, and in terms of the tenants, it would be hugely valuable for them because it delivers affordable warmth for them and combats hypothermia and other problems as well. So we accept that it's the absolutely essential good thing to do, but we've just got here because your party has not followed this course of actually investing at a sensible time. It's left it, abandoned it, cut the legislation, and then sailed into the storm. and says, oh dear, we're going to store, we're going to have to sell some of our houses. It's already happened as housing associations. I'm not saying Shropshire, but housing associations around the world just jumping their cheaper housing. What happens that? It gets into the private sector, and if you think the energy efficiency of the social sector needs improvement, you should look at the energy efficiency of the private sector, the private landlords, the socials. And those are very, very significant problems. I mean, we as Oswestry Town Councils have to put it in its own scheme to try and get loft insulation out of some of the properties in the town, because years and years and years of government intervention to try and improve energy efficiency, we've got hundreds of properties out there which haven't even got loft insulation. Many of them are privately rented. They've just bypassed all the exhortations and the legislation. So this is, it's a huge issue, and it's a really problematic issue. But don't think we've just suddenly arrived here. We've arrived here because we haven't faced up to this at a time when we could have done, and we could have had a programme, creating jobs, creating employment, creating affordable war. It was all manageable.
Okay, I'm not sure there was a actual ask in there, so I suppose the one I wanted to ask was the thing we haven't mentioned so far, obviously, is obviously a big challenge, but Homes England, where they fit into this in terms of what they're looking for, what their current agenda is, and the funding that goes with that, and what opportunities that might provide as well as part of the mix to this. So that's the providers, what their thoughts are.
I was going to turn to Mel for this one, because Mel attended a Homes England briefing quite recently, and so has some sort of the latest knowledge of their position.
Hi all, because I went to an event on the 13th that was in Leeds, and I understand there's another event tomorrow in Birmingham that I'm guessing that many of you will be attending. What was very clear at that event is Homes England are well aware of the need to have higher levels of grant funding, but more particularly the need for flex in grant funding because of the pressures, not just in terms of carbon zero, but also in terms of regeneration. And they're fully aware that this is a situation. They stress that they're in negotiations and discussions with DLUC at the moment to see how things can possibly change. I do think it's really important that that message gets across. Hopefully it'll probably come across again tomorrow at the event, that this move to look at things differently, because it's not all about having free or cheap land, because that doesn't exist. Councils have got their fiscal duties to meet. There's not much land that's going around. Even greenfield land is difficult to can be difficult to bring back into use due to abnormals, or because it's in terms of surfacing that site. And so it's a matter now of looking holistically and having flexibility in the programme. But I think I'm sure they would welcome other voices sort of saying that same thing. And I know it was Inside Housing a little while ago, wasn't it, that the chair of the NatFed again has asked that we have flexibility in how grant is used. I think as a council we too, not only because we're stockholding, but also because we're developing council, we do totally realise the issues with the rent cap, affordability, and then all these other pressures relating to existing stock and how those impact on moving forward and developing a new stock and improving stock to meet housing need.
If I can, I don't know what the question is, because at the social housing board we have attended from Homes England to be one of the social housing boards to share the problems we have, also to influence in relation to what do we need as a grant in Shropshire. So we don't do it because we've been nice, we also want Homes England to understand what we need in Shropshire to grant spheres with. What I will say, if the question is are they doing enough, I found Homes England to be really supportive of any scheme we put in. And I think honestly, even though we're not one of the strategic partners, which is predominantly combined West Midlands, who tend to get a lot of it. We think all of us, if we put a scheme in and it worked, or we need slightly more records, I find that they're very flexible with us. So they're very supportive of Shropshire, very supportive of the housing providers in Shropshire. And even when I put a scheme in and I've gone back and said, prices have changed, we're not forward to make it work for Shropshire. I don't think we're an issue. it's finding opportunities to build in. I think housing doesn't support it. I think that's issue.
Yeah, I think that's good. It's just that understanding of where, because they fit well in the mix, and a lot of the funding nationally comes through those. It's just where they fit that really. And did you indicate? Probably covered.
I mean, it's kind of gone now. I mean, I just say, you know, I might have known it being a nasty children party sport back in 2000, how to invest, you know, how far to go that kind of thing. What I don't want to do is turn this into a part of political thing that doesn't seem to play a card. So I'll just
yeah, just to reiterate, the officer will not tolerate this descending to party politics. Please say that to council.
Thank you.
Yes, next.
I know we're coming to the end of the meeting, so I want to be fairly quick. Just want to give some praise to a particular housing provider that demolished an airy type house in my village. Semi-detached, had 2 large gardens, and replaced it with 3 ultra-modern, state-of-the-art buildings with all the facilities that have been mentioned, such as rain harvesting and full insulation and everything. And I think it's been an excellent scheme. And if the finances permit and when the circumstances are right, I'm sure that is the answer to some of our older dwellings, like the airy houses and similar, because everybody in the village has been praising that and saying what a fantastic scheme was. So that is partly the answer.
I just wanted to touch on the fact of, obviously, going forward, we haven't got the issue with this, we don't have enough capacity in the area, and it's how we design that properly. And just going back to Richard's point about collaboration and so on between all the different partners, obviously the social housing forum and so on, I suppose it's how much of it through collaborating more closely together between the existing providers, how much can we close the gap, do we think, using that, and how much of it needs to be asked to government or somebody at that level to make the step change. I'm just trying to get a feel for what we can look at and make recommendations on, and in terms of trying to close that gap locally. But there are some things that are just purely the size of the task. It's out of our control. We need, like where you're getting squeezed and so on. I know you'll be lobbying through your organisations and will be lobbying government. So is there anything we can do to strengthen that side of it? How much does that play in the mix, I guess? Instead, have a go with that.
I would say we do a lot together, and it's funny, we did a presentation to general councillors who would have come along just before Christmas. But at the end, we talked about what is there any more we can do, is there anything we feel the council could do to assist. Whichever way you look at it, and again, I don't know what Canary's objectives are in relation to it, but if you're building home ownership for Canary, you obviously disclose the objectives of Canary, and you're selling those as are and into the market development. But that means that land's gone now. So you're putting forward a lot. And all I'll say is just, indeed, I know does work hard to try and sort of put land to the housing associations first, and try and sort of do that. So it's more of that. It's that are the bits we need to close. To land supply, if there is one, then balance, is it affordable you need, or is it sort of helping you deal with your own budgetary pressures? That's what the balance is for yourselves. Totally understand it, but it's balancing that with affordable. Because I think that's what the council can probably do more of going forward. Apply that conscience when you do it. Even if we ask no more than that, I think that's the ask for us. That's the bit I think we could work close together. To say, right, do we take it on this for the sake of lifting out numbers of affordable housing and taking not the items. I think the other aspect really, or I think we could probably just do it close to is working together as adults. So sometimes when we do take a decision to take to areas and put three back, seem to be putting three back rather than you taking something away. Because sometimes that message doesn't get delivered when we're trying to do those things. So again, all of that. And the other thing is, I'll tell you this story. I live in quite a sort of rural part of Shirehall, where everything around here is well in Bradford, and every year tries to put planning to build something else. And it's happening every time you got the shoebox, I've got my back to be slow work, I've got one lizard, and every time it goes in, I pull that out, what is that to do? And you all represent villages who all can be like this. So when we turn up and say we build affordable housing, guess what? They the type of housing we want to save a lot of people. Not all, I'm sure, from why you're sitting here trying to solve the problem, that's not ourselves. And it's helped us get that out as well. Is the other big way to sort of, affordable housing is what you will realise that. I think sometimes making the constituents rarely realise it then. When we do come along and offer a solution to something that may have been in the private sector before.
Do you think we're not explaining then that it's, you know, it's affordable housing, but it's needed in the communities? I've got one lot that's with at the moment, and that's the first thing they said when I've gone back to the parish, and I can't make them have it, but I've tried to say to them, well, that's 20 houses, you know. Don't you think that some of your young people who are going to move off and not going to work for their fathers on their farms and all these different things, you know, you really need them here to do that work? Why are you saying, no, we don't want this? But you might get 2 or 3 on the council that unfortunately will sway the rest to go that way.
I don't know what the answer is. All I'm saying is it can help us when we do arrive in our village and there's a need for affordable, is to sort of help in a way to sort of show the importance of it. Because clearly we demonstrate the importance of it today in your own report. And it's that way, you know, because we all want it until it's been built next to a certain place, and that's when the problem is usually come. You know, when I walked away from the view, well, I've got the community support on the development. We do some great stuff with community-led developments in different parts of the county, but where there's not, why should I spend all my time trying to convince people? I've got good places I can build, and that's probably part of working together to make sure that everybody understands the need for it. You're right. We can't build anything without Jane telling us to let his plan, but actually it's got to be to local need, and got to offer people in that local village those properties. So it isn't shipping people in from elsewhere. It's meeting the local need for local population. And I suppose that's the element of that. And I think I was just looking, Sarah, is it if you pulled off that slide we did last time? I mean, that was the sort of stuff that I just land at a time really help us when we can. But I think that probably
the main thing with this village is that the Hereford's just shortly down the road. They've got some housing need. Why can't they that live over there have some of our housing need? That's the question I think. Now, really, it's quite simple, isn't it? If we could let them Shropshire side, maybe some of the people, they're all in the same village, but one's in Hereford and one's in Shropshire.
We'll come back to that one a little bit. I'm just wondering, I'm conscious part of the report is we've got the new Shropshire plan. The whole idea is that's not just Shropshire Council being inwardly, how do we do this and so on. So I suppose the new question, and Dean might want to join us at some point, is I'm just conscious we've got you in the room. I think part of the meetings that we're doing now and so on is about what should the target be for social housing? What should the measures for that be? I think that's probably where we're going to end up, because it gives us a way to move forward when we come back and re-examine this issue, rather than go through, this is just the current pressures. It's, okay, how have we moved it forward, how we get closer, but if we don't set a target, however ambitious, taking Duncan's point and so on, if there isn't a target, it feels like this will just continue to push, and it gives us a bit more ammunition. So I was just conscious from a provider's point of view and and so on. We'll obviously look at this when we do the recommendations at the next meeting, but just on an initial thought, are there things we could set as tangible targets to move us closer at least to where we want to be? I think the timing of the plan runs, the current plan will run until 2028, and then obviously it's going to be an ongoing thing, we know that for the next 10, 15 years and so on, but now is the chance to set what we think is a target we should be working towards. So I suppose there's an overall target, taking off the hat of who's getting there and delivering it and so on. What do people think the target should be? And then obviously we can consider that at a future meeting when we do our recommendations. So I don't know. If you want to start, or if you want to this again. Yeah.
From the experiences that we've gathered as housing developed through Cornwall developments. We've always tried to over-deliver against planning policy on affordable elements while still balancing off greater energy performance and additional benefits to the council and community. We've found broadly that 20 to 25% affordable has been very deliverable on our sides, while still returning a reasonable profit and enabling us to pursue other priorities that the council has given us around setting a standard of 50% above building regs for sustainability and various other things that we've been told on a case-by-case basis are priorities for that local area. So, and I guess one of the purposes of Cornwall was to demonstrate to the market that this is an achievable target while still generating a profit and acting in a commercial manner. So from our own experience, I would perhaps suggest that we might want to start at the starting point, looking at kind of ballpark. That's an experience that we've
I think that's my point. What should the big picture be, whether it's 20 or 25% and so on? Should it be just in general trying to increase the affordable rates delivery through whatever it is? Should it be that we're aiming to close the gap and say, take Wayne's point, what the measure is, it's going to take 6 years to house those people that are on the current list? Should the target be there's a gradual reduction in that? And however it's achieved is a different matter, but if there's a common sense of purpose about what the target is, that's something to keep referring to and the efforts.
I also chair as part of the emerging plan that hopefully will get approved and signed off by the planning inspector. There is a contingency in that to enable us, because part of our housing allocation in general is there to windfall sites that are within the plan itself. But within the policy of the local plan, it enables us to grant greater weight to significant over-provision of affordable properties in sites outside of the local plan. So if a site came forward, for example, on the edge of a village but outside of the development boundary, not within the local plan, if the developer of that site was proposing to bring forward 50% affordable on that site, then that will, under the new local plan, be a justifiable catalyst to bring forward that site. So I would also suggest you consider what the policies are in the new emerging local plan that will also help to enable and grow the provision of affordable housing outside of just the direct policy level that we set affordable housing.
We can come back to in detail, but I was just conscious we've got others in the room as well. It's just kind of just an honest take on what's realistic in the short to medium term, I guess.
Narrowing the gap between supply and demand has got to be sort of the principal driver, and then it's how you allocate the numbers to that, isn't it? And then once you know what the gap is, what the desire is, you know, over what period of time are we going to make that gap smaller and reduce down to nothing? Then it's about what do we have to do in order to deliver that? What are the actions? Where can we look at policy? Where can we look at more collaborative working, funding, whatever the solution is? I think I would also say, rather than it just being a number of units, I think the refinement is needed there around the type of units in the location Because at a strategy level, which is whatever all of us sitting in this room are responsible for working at a strategic level, we take it up and up and up, but there does need to be the fine-grained knowledge underneath. You know, often we find developers saying, right, well, we'll give you 10%, but they're all one-bedroom flats. Well, that's not where we've got the greatest team. We don't want one-bedroom flats, thank you. You know, we want houses because that's where we've got the need, that's where we need that flexibility. Our older people don't necessarily want to be in flats, certainly don't want to be on the first floor or above. So there is a level of sophistication. So we can start with that high level strategy. Here's the gap. Here's how long it's going to take us to fill it. This is what we need to do to fill it. And then there's the finer grained detail rather than just being a numbers game which the developers play back as to marrying in the new build supply with the best use of existing accommodation. So we have older people living in 3-bedroom houses because we can't house them into something that suits their needs. Because we get tied up and say, well, there's only, you know, you're a couple or a single person, then you can't have 2 bedrooms, you have to have 1. And that is one way of managing your supply. But if we were building smaller 2-bedroom units where they can have a carer or a grandchild stay, or, you know, lots of older people, they prefer to have separate rooms, and we could probably wiggle them out of their 3-bedroom house where they're not using upstairs anyway. So there is a fine-grained element that comes with it as well. And I think we need to be conscious, particularly when we're looking at the allocations policy, that we make sure that if for one vacancy, you can sometimes, if you're really clever, get 3 or 4 moves out of it. And that needs to be taken into account as well. So it's marrying the current supply and the new supply needs to be taken on ask.
I suppose really it's getting back to that basic sort of equation we started with. It's using numbers as a judgment call, you know, it's a 10-year problem just to sort out what you've got. Clearly can't be acceptable. We've got to, if you wanted to, you need to halve that at least, and we really get that down to 5 years and that's acceptable. But that does mean probably doubling the input of moving forward out of the end. That's that 350 to 5 years. And somebody else you're not getting 350 minutes. But even half it is a task to do. Some of it will be 50 to 25%. You know, some of it will be that better decision when it comes to any council decision. Could we provide affordable rather than do what we're about to do? Because our view is we want to get it there to 5 years, not 10. You know, and I suppose you can go with that's just half where we are there. The time and time to do with what we've got, that will drive a series of probably decisions for you to take in the council. Where you then position the provision of social affordability in all the decisions you take.
I'm very conscious from your point of view as well as the market of the more properties you've got and the more that they're generating and they wash their faces and so on. Again, it's a better business model, but it's a better situation for providers as well. Gives you a bit of certainty of the big organisations and things that come with that.
And more private funding.
And more private funding you can lever in. Yeah.
So that's basically principally in the rental stream.
Just want to breathe there, just conscious. Is there anything you want to add from a Romford perspective? I'm very conscious, I haven't looked out for a while, so.
Not at the moment. It's quite difficult to hear, but I'll do my best.
Okay, hopefully the live stream will be clearer. We can always package up some of the bits that come out of it and so on. I just thought I'd give Richard and John a last chance of it because I'm just conscious of timing. And I'll come to Dan and then we'll come over to Tom because he's been jotting away and has pages and pages of notes. And I think we've got a good way forward and we've got plenty to take forward and look at. So,
Chair, then if I may say, it may have been said already, but it feels like a way forward maybe to ask the RPs what their plans are. You know, as I said, I've said we're looking to do, 125. That's our existing plan for the short to medium term. It may be that we look at marrying that supply and demand, and I think what Sarah said is a great point really in terms of understanding the future needs from Shropshire Council so that we can plan to get there. And I think if I'll touch on a point that Wayne made, I think some time ago, around yes, if it is going to be support, then great. Let's tell us. So let's start working on an arrangement whereby we can provide the homes and you can provide the support, that kind of thing. So it's a bit about getting ahead of the game. So I know you're talking about targets, but for me, I think it's rather than just setting an arbitrary target based on demand, let's look at where we are as well and what's realistic.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just first of all, the opportunity to have these discussions today can be very beneficial. I was spoken about earlier on, we do speak to each other providers at the level in the council, at the social housing forum, and we try to work as collaboratively as we can. We can always do more, I'm sure. But the opportunity to better understand the needs that are coming through from the council certainly helps us, and it'll certainly help us work better with the council to address those needs.
Yeah, I think referencing back to Sarah's point as well about the fine-grained detail about need, I think, and John's point as well just then, that's exactly what we're working on at the moment. So there's been a lot of work happening over the course of the last 6 to 12 months to start to establish a greater clarity about the needs that we've got, and I referenced earlier on, it's in the report as well, this limited delivery of older people's housing and supported housing, specialist housing. Those are the people who it's really hardest to move off our housing register. Those are the people who have the most specific housing that is hardest to meet. And I think that's in particular where affordable housing is the solution. There may be other people on our housing register where actually there are other solutions. The private rented sector may be an appropriate solution for them, provided we're able to support that as well. So I think developing that more sort of holistic picture of what's going on in the housing market in Shropshire and understanding the role that affordable housing can play within it, and then targeting the particular groups that we really need to highlight. And then also when we are delivering general needs housing, making sure that it's allocated to those who are in the greatest need, so that we are moving people off that list and able to provide what's required to support our communities. I think those would be the goals, but I think it is helpful to kind of think about how we translate that into specific targets, and that's certainly something that we can work on as we go through these meetings that we've got booked into the future as well.
Okay, so just before I come to Tom, obviously we've touched on a wide range of subjects. I think there's plenty we'll probably go away, but I'm not sure how long the list of recommendations is going to be at this stage by the time we reach the end of the third meeting. I'm guessing reasonably lengthy. Just conscious, some of the points, such as before, which Duncan raised around what level of affordable rates and Dean's touched on and so on, and then sort of future land purchases or anything around retrofits. And then the biggest thing I'm taking as well is communications seems to be a big thing as a whole around this area. I'm trying to coordinate that, but a lot of that feels like we'll need more information if we're going to make an informed decision on it. So I will pass over to Tom of where we take this. We've got one more meeting scheduled in. Two more meetings, sorry, scheduled in. It's can you give us an idea of what you're picking up as well, and what we might want for these next two meetings, so we can arrive at the end of the third one ready to make some informed decisions?
I think there's an opportunity to just revisit and rescope those next two meetings. You've covered a lot of ground today. And I think one of the things, I'm just getting back into some of this, and certainly around social housing as well. Some things haven't changed, really, over the years, but there are new challenges and there are more things coming through. I think for the next meeting, that really is about what we have the opportunity to do now. So it is, what is it we need to know? What is it as a committee you need to know to take that next step forward? What is it you're trying to achieve? What do we need to bring to that meeting? So when we come to that third meeting, which is in June, we've got a date for it, it's likely in June. You want to be in a position as a committee that you can review everything you've heard, come up with your conclusions and refine your recommendations. What I'd say on the recommendations is, I think, again, you can do a lot around today, but by the time we get to that meeting in June, I suspect we'll refine down, and the way the chair summarised that then, I think communications awareness, particularly with the town and parish councils and communities and what people are expecting. I can remember doing something a few years ago in Church Stretton, and what somebody wanted, they wanted to make sure they had more social housing, more affordable housing there, but they didn't want it to look like that. I had to look and there's an awful lot, I think, still, which sounds like that's still playing through. I think I was really pleased that Sarah, when she said that, because I made notes probably 5 minutes into this around trying to sort of, if we think about where in the county, what is it people want, what's driving it, we look at the context over the past 4 years, what's changed over those 4 years, what's changed in terms of the geographies, the families, is it COVID, is it cost of living, those all play in. I'm doing a piece of work at the moment, I have done a piece of work looking around impact and demand in terms of the acute hospitals. Look at the acute hospitals and what's happening there. They want to prevent people going in. Well, we know houses got a massive role to play in that, but also there are people who need to be discharged from hospital. It's got to be the right place for those people to be discharged to. So there's an awful lot we can cover as well as the committee in terms of strategic context and the business case for this, because it is huge and it's far-reaching. So I think getting the context, getting the strategic position right. Let's think about where things are. Let's think about the scale of demand. So, as you said, we know where we are now. What do we think it looks like in the future, taking into account all the different environmental factors which are going to be playing into it, looking at demographics, understanding what some of the changes are that will be potentially being proposed and being able to react to those changes, for example, in terms of changes to the way hospitals are working, whether we need to see any changes in terms of what support is required in communities. Those are all factors we need to make sure we're building in, so that when we do what Sarah said there, which is basically, in my mind, I was thinking a chart, which has got a map or a line which charts up and says, this is what the demand is, based on these different factors, and somewhere in this, we're going to need another line which comes up and says, if we do this, this is where it crosses that line. If we do this, this is where it crosses that line. And then as a committee, I'm not suggesting you are going to do this next bit, but you're going to do a recommending, I suspect, as a piece of work which looks at that demand against cost, against pace, and what needs to be put in place to close that gap down, because we do need to address this. One of the things we've looked at in the past, James on this as well, and I think Mel will be as well, is when you look at where our older populations are, we look at our most affordable, least affordable accommodation is, and then we look at where people are able to afford that accommodation, who are most likely to be the ones, for example, who are involved providing that domiciliary care or care support into those homes. They're not in the same place, and it's a big opportunity for the council to be looking at that with the providers to be able to say this is what we can cut in the gap. So I think we're in a massive great starting point. I would suggest that if you reflect on after this meeting, if there's anything you don't think we covered, you think we need to know for that next meeting, let me know, or let Daniel know in the next few weeks. And then we will work with Mel and with Jane, and we'll reach out to try and close those gaps down and make sure those are covered. But I mean, I think this, for me, is a really good meeting to come in here. And, I think it'd be quite frank and open.
So I think we can take that forward. I think the danger would be, having done these before, is I think what I'd ask the committee ideally to think about is, yes, we want some big stuff that's big for long term and the rest of it and so on, but I'm also conscious it feels like there are certain things that we could ask the council and others to do in the shorter term around whether it's that collaboration and the other bits, or the assessing the needs and so on, but timelines on some of that sort of things as well, so that we know where we're going with it, rather than we've had a debate, we know what the problem is, as Tom says, we're not revisiting this in a number of years' time. We want to keep active on this and see that we're actually driving some change through, but obviously we realise we're dependent on other organisations, government and others to make a big sort of step changes. So, but yes, I would echo the point, if there's anything you want covering in the next meeting, points of information and so on, if you can let Tom know, and we can get that lined up. So I think I'm probably going to draw a close to that item here, with obvious thanks to the council officers and to the providers that have come along. And thank you, as you say, to Tom for being so frank and honest. I hope you realise we're getting value out of this. I suppose the proof will be in the pudding of what comes out the other end of these meetings. But from our point of view, you're welcome to be involved throughout ideally, we want you to be involved throughout the whole of this process, and we can arrive with recommendations to the Cabinet that we know as well are encompassing where you would like to see the council go, but also in terms of the Shropshire plan, it gives a bit of weight to that in terms of if we're going forward and we're lobbying others and so on, there's a clear thing that we're all working towards. So thank you very much. But we're going to go on to work programme now, so I will give you the opportunity to take the lead at this point. Thank you for those that joined us online as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jim, I've just realised I've let them all leave the room before you managed to hold them all. You might have to catch them again.
Thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay. Item 7 is work programme. I think, as we've heard from Tom, there maybe we might want to do a little bit of adjusting in terms of that, but I'll hand over to Dan.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, apologies to the committee. I mentioned earlier that rules concerning promotions and orders of speech within council don't apply to scrutiny committees. I've been corrected by this by Duncan, who's referred to the correct part of the Constitution, and indeed they do apply. So my apologies, Duncan did indeed have a right to sum up before you took a vote on this. Tom's, whilst we had that little sort of exchange earlier, Tom spoke to Greg White, the council solicitor on constitutional matters, and I think they've agreed that there's an opportunity here just to jot down those notes in a user-friendly manner for chairs and committee members going forward, because this is a sort of this is, I think, council very well set up and very well supported in terms of its constitutional support. Generally, well, frankly, I'm an analyst when it comes to these matters, so we don't generally have a professional to hand. So I think the user-friendly guide that you can all refer to would be safe blushes going forward. Anyway, moving on. Obviously, we've had a meeting today, and we've got you've covered a lot today, as Tom said. So I think that the items around housing need here probably amended by Tom and presented back to the meeting, or indeed between meetings, that's for you to decide. The second strand to your work was around community level transport matters. Met with officers who presented to the committee and to me to look at this work. Part of the challenge around this at the moment is that we have yet to adopt the local transport plan, which is still in gestation. It was in gestation when I started this locally 35 years ago, and then it still seems to be developed, and it would seem to some extent matters around government policy around transport are emerging faster than we can actually write the blooming plans to administer them. So I think that's coming to committee, to place on the committee in a week or so, and that will provide, I think, an opportunity to specify some of the matters that will emanate from that in a way that this committee can consider them in a meaningful way before Cabinet does, or Council does. What I'm very keen to not do is for stuff to go to Council and then come back to you, because then it just becomes an information item. What's the point, really? And I think some of the ideas and things that we might have done just been through Council already, so there's no point. However, there is something that I draw your attention to. I'm going to be a little coy here, but I would recommend, in terms of our first item coming forward, is that we invite James Willox to the committee to talk about updates to our community transport
funding and to our subsidised bus funding. So I can't really go into any more detail on that, but I would recommend that would be an option for us to do that and I'll leave it there.
So he's going to come here to the meeting?
If you'd like.
I was going to ring him actually, because I wanted to know that as well.
Fantastic.
Well, let's take that one. Are we happy that we? Yes.
Fabulous. Great stuff. I think that would be a useful piece of work. You might remember that Sean McCarthy came to talk about the Armed Forces Covenant early 2021, and you would like to bring an update on the work as requested by yourselves for that meeting in March as well. And then another item as well that's contained in there, this is really one for the municipal year, and this is something the chair has been quite keen on. This committee has dabbled in but never really followed through on. And this is around working with town and parish councils. It's a common theme throughout Screwsbury that sometimes some of the blockages that we face and some of the opportunities that are to hand concern how we work with town and parish councils, particularly around things like youth provision, planning, winter maintenance, community first responders with regards to ambulance service, environmental maintenance grants. There's all sorts of things there that perhaps have developed in an uncoordinated manner over the years. And I think both the chair here and other chairs have suggested that scrutiny has the space and the capacity to sort of look at that more generally and make sure that our arrangements with town and parish councils are working as effectively as they can do to explore opportunities to develop, strengthen those ties. So that work has yet to be developed in any form. We certainly going to in terms of reference for it like we do with the other items. But I just felt that for your attention. I penciled
Can I just say again, my town and parish councils, I have 5 of them. So, you know, that really help. But I have got very, very good. They tell me things.
Absolutely.
It's fantastic.
So I think that's the point of it feeds more into the corporate thing on what the whole idea behind the Shropshire plan is. It's not just the count, it's everybody delivering. And they're important partners, and these partners were today. So.
Yeah, and the town, I give them stuff. She sent it through to me. So,
Great.
But they get it wrong sometimes. I had something came through on Monday, which was wrong at the time, nobody knows. And I said, no, it's not right. What you have is you get this and this. So it makes it that it's not so complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I say.
Okay, are we happy with that as a word programme? I think taking the point about the notes from today's meeting, even if there's some informal notes about what we think we've got out of it, where we want to go and so on, and then it's that opportunity for you as members to see those quick informal notes and go, actually, didn't we talk about this, or put this add to it, so on, just feed that back.
Really relaxing, the whole relaxing in South Shropshire.
Well, again, that might be one of the areas if you look at going forward, that's specifically an area of focus that we can make a recommendation of into. So it's just, yeah, it's that sort of thing.
I mean, I'll have a chat with Jeremy first instance to see what we've got and how we can do it. For me, I'm quite visual, so I like to see that in the map, and I like to be able to see, in an ideal world, you can switch off different layers, so you can start almost asking different questions. So you could look at things like demography. You could look at transport routes, you could look at the types of housing which is there, you could look at what kind of demand you've currently got within the current social housing list and registers, and what people say they want to have in different places and what's the demand that's there. I think Sarah made a very interesting point about the fact that this is long-standing, but you will have communities where people, older people in particular, probably asset rich, cash poor. So those are bigger houses, they're in bigger homes. Actually, what they need is a 1 or 2 bedroom bungalow with a level access shower. Those are not necessarily there. And I think it's how, from your perspective as a committee, I would say this is an opportunity to work with the officers in particular, who are the experts in this area, and with the providers to help inform the policy. And I think I would say generally, we may need more work to be done on where we want to how we get there. But everybody I heard today was saying the same thing about where they want to get to. So yeah,
I think that's my opinion. That's where I think we can make it clear. Certainly, one of the recommendations is to make it clear we want this direction. How that's then achieved, it's to a degree passed to others. But the only other thing I would say is if anybody has any ideas for people, you've seen it works quite well, having the providers here and others, we've tried to start encouraging more external parties to come to the meetings. If you've got any other ideas about who could give us some insight on this particular issue.
A reader to our meeting.
Well, this way may not be it. We may want to reach out to others and so on, but we'll take all suggestions and then we can all discuss it. Yeah. I think that's I'm just taking Tom's point. I think that's the thing. Taking Tom's point around sort of reasons and reasons why older people might not want to move properties and so on. My immediate for social task force and people have citizens advice to the sort of organisations where those people will go to and will speak quite candidly about the reasons for their concerns or things like that. That's something we could look at, but it just depends. We're in danger of it's such a big subject and the rest of it. We don't got too many ideas.
So you can make one property into two properties. Got people living upstairs. And that was never taken. You know, I mean, I live in this big house, and really, I might not be able to get up those stairs. Be a young person living upstairs and an older person living downstairs.
So this is the sort of thing I'd suggest. If you get Tom, you can and then you can have that discussion with the officers to say what has to be considered before this is the thing, and then we can decide if there's some merit in it. We get it on the agenda for the next meeting. If the feeling that's not going to get us to where we need to go, then. But that's the same for all the subjects. Yes, community transport, all the rest. Quite happy to see. We can ask. They don't have to appear, but we can certainly ask them.
I think looking at the way the work programme has been set up, it's very sensible in the sense that you've got your big topics, say community transport, or this housing needs, for example, means that you can have a first meet. You can do your mission disclosure. You can have a first meeting like this, which might confirm or refocus some of your energy. And then the next meeting closes that gap down more, and the community transport is the same. So that first meeting is an opportunity to get an up-to-date view of where things are at. Then next time around, where you want to go to, because the meetings that I would say at the moment are roughly 6 to 8 weeks apart. There's time to try and get people set up and understand what it is that I need to talk to you about.
So is it worth it, so for this bus meeting, for example, then is it, are we going to ask bus providers?
So what's the title? What we officially titled it?
It's a very generic.
It's community transport. Yeah.
Community transport. So I think the question of not just
would it be the voluntary sort of transport groups?
Well, some of them they tend to come to groups. The big three, obviously the Shrewsbury, Oswestry, and Church. So if you like one,
we can do a mixture of that and the providers bus services, as you say. We can extend the invitation. And if this stage has to come in across there, we can.
Yes, community transport group and bridge north as well.
Well, we'll look at who we could invite to that as well, and then see their views as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have the first meeting, we hear from them, and we look at whether we want to bring the rest in. Yeah. But it might be a good route to do this. It will be to reach out to the Community Sector Assembly or Community Sector groups and follow up on some of those questions. The other, I guess, thing we want to consider is whether or not there is some scope in getting more from moving communities to come to, in terms of evidence and question. But again, we'll cross those bridges if you come. Questions, and it might be you bring back some of those sources of evidence.
Everyone happy with that as an approach, and then we'll
Fine, as I say, just get in touch in between the meetings if you suddenly have an idea or there's something else you want to touch on. Whatever. So, okay, right. Well, with that, the date and time of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 22nd of March at 1:30 p.m. I'm sorry, we've gone a little bit long on a few of the later meetings, but I think we're getting to the point of, as Thomas said, I think we're at the stage of let's get the information in and then they'll hopefully get a bit more focused.
You always get into the meeting, you get to quite intense discussion. It's one big subject. I actually quite like the fact that the interrogator is not word, but you're able to go back and forth, in-depth question. I quite like that.
Okay, that's good. Okay,
So it's not, it isn't necessary.
yeah. So at the moment, that's how we'll tend to operate, and then if we've got ideas.
For the simple reason I said I couldn't come. But
We'll look at
I
schedules.
was so upset about the second same time, I said to Roger, what do you want to do on Tuesday?
Yeah, no, that's fine. We'll take the note of that scheduling.